Xtra.
And welcome to ABC 7 Extra Sunday. Good evening, everyone. I'm Mark Ross. Tonight, we're exploring the issue of why children are struggling to read. Test results released last month from the National Assessment of Education Progress shows 4th and 8th grade students in schools nationwide are faring worse in reading since the pandemic. Reading scores have dropped 5% nationally since 2019. In Texas, NAEP's Nations Report Card shows 61% of 8th grade students tested are at or above basic skill levels. That's 5 points lower than the national average and 5 points less than the 2022 state testing numbers. 57% of Texas 4th graders are considered at or above basic, slightly lower than 2022 and 2 points lower than the national average. Now, it's important to note that El Paso area school districts are not part of the testing done by NAEP. They test in districts in Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, and Austin. NAEP is a congressionally mandated program that's overseen and administered by the National Center for Education Statistics within the U.S. Department of Education and the Institute of Education Sciences. Joining me tonight are Eddie Rodriguez, the Executive Director of the Council on Regional Economic and Educational Development, or CREED, Dr. Jessica Arellano, the Executive Director of Curriculum and Instruction at Canutillo ISD, and Norma De La Rosa, President of the El Paso Teachers Association. And I welcome all of you to the show.
Thank you.
I want to get your reactions to the national and state findings from the report. And Dr. Arellano, I'd like to start with you first.
So it's definitely not a surprise, and I'm glad you did mention the pandemic, because although it's been 4 years, it's a reality of what we're seeing today, especially in those test scores. Those 4th graders were back then first grade, a very, very crucial point where reading is developed in our students. And so we are seeing the effects, and we see them every year. And so it's, although like you mentioned, there are 4 inner cities that take the test and not in El Paso, I think it's important to understand the border community and the needs of our students, especially being in a border town, and those that are at risk, and those additional struggles that perhaps some students experience.
Mr. Rodriguez, your thoughts?
Well, it is definitely an issue with respect to the reading capability as well as on the mathematics side. At CREED, we've put the attention in trying to focus on both of those subject matter, because they really are the key to the success of the student on a post-secondary basis. And with our emphasis on the economic engagement, you can see that it's really well established that the higher your educational attainment in your population, the higher your per capita income. And so for all of our discussion about how we expand our economy and how we make for better options for all of our population so that we can draw them here as well as give them other options whether they want to leave, not because they have to leave. The aspect here of focusing on reading in particular, as well as the mathematics skills, are critical for the next step that most of these students need to take if they're going to succeed both individually, and we're going to benefit, as a population, as a region, as a city.
And Ms. De La Rosa, you're on the front lines basically with other teachers. What's your perspective on the struggle for children to read?
Well, the struggle for our children to read is, as my colleague here mentioned, is started with the pandemic, really. As she stated, our 4th graders this year basically were caught in that situation where there was no learning going on because our schools had been closed. And then when we did go to the virtual learning, we still had a lot of our students who, for whatever reasons, either chose not to get onto the virtual learning or got onto virtual learning, but really had struggled, through the virtual learning. So with that pandemic, we finally got back into our buildings and able to do face-to-face instruction. We saw the absolute learning loss that our students experienced during that time. And when we start with learning how to read, learning how to read is the ability to read is dependent on each individual person, and some pick up reading skills much quicker than others. And so when we have this wide spectrum of how to teach reading and how our students learn reading, that's where our teachers struggle, because with what we see happening in our classrooms today, it is becoming more and more difficult to be able to focus on those specific skills.
Now, Dr. Ariano, not to put you on the spot, but we went to the Texas Education Agency's website to gather your district's data from last spring's STAR test and the 2023 test. And I want you to take a look at the screen here at the numbers. While there are 4 columns that break down the performance levels, I want to focus on meets and above. And we're looking at 4th and 8th grade reading scores there towards the right of our graphic. For 4th graders, the number of students who scored at meets or above was the same as 2023 at 56%, while the number of 8th graders who were at meets or above dropped 6 points from 2023. Your thoughts on the scores?
So it's definitely alarming, and I think we recognize that. We work really hard. We have extremely knowledgeable leadership, principals, and teachers at all of our campuses. And so looking at this data, it is very alarming, but we look at it throughout the year. And so the focus, and we knew this, so 2 years ago, because of the pandemic, we started our planning for a literacy framework because we saw the trends going down. And so this literacy framework is a way to engage all stakeholders and really develop a strong literacy coherency within the district. And so we didn't want those gaps to continue in the trajectory that you just mentioned. We want to close them at a faster pace. So in our partnership with CREED, we're at a point where we've planned out our literacy framework. Now we're ready to implement it. We're ready to train all stakeholders, families, teachers, district leaders, campus leaders, and even the students on what is my role in literacy to bring these scores up.
And we'll touch more on that project between your district and CREED in our next segment. I wanted now to look at the results from other local districts when it came to the STAR test. El Paso District 4th graders were meets and above were at 51%, 8th graders at 50%. Isletta's meets and above for 4th graders 57%, 8th graders at 52%, and Socorro 4th graders 54% were at meets or above, 8th graders were at 60%. Ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest, if this were a grade for a class, it's still a failing grade.
Correct.
Comments?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Very much so, and it's one of the reasons why we've engaged to work in partnership with different districts to try and address the issue, because the reading situation has been a chronic situation for a while. Ms. De La Rosa pointed out since 2019, but actually in terms of competitiveness on a national scale as well as on a state scale, it still is it's a situation that requires significant improvement. You want to see eventually to see children reading at grade level at each of the grades that they're in, so that there isn't the remediation that's occurring right now in the system, and as a consequence it draws people down in terms of their capability and instructional placement. So part of our effort from a philanthropic standpoint is to work with the districts, and one of the things that attracts us to what Canutillo is doing is that it possesses the potential for being a significant solution that can apply, of course, to Canutillo, but may have applications across the board. But without that reading skill, you're going to be very limited in your options when you get out of high school and you're looking at what life is going to give you in terms of your choices.
Dr. Ariano?
And you're absolutely right. And I think the science of teaching reading happens at a very, you have to catch them in kinder through 2nd grade. Numbers, the research shows that's where our children learn to read the best. And so, you know, incorporating not only word recognition and how to decode, but also language comprehension to be able to comprehend what it is they are reading. And so with this new research, that's going to be our focus. So teachers are required to take reading academies at the elementary level, but we want to take it a step further and support them in the classroom. What does it look like in the classroom? How do we address and get that 51% meets, which is on grade level, to 90%? Because that's the goal, 100% is the goal. So that's the work we're embarking into creating an environment where our teachers feel they're equipped and have the knowledge and the skills and the resources to be able to help all students, especially those that come with gaps.
And Ms. De La Rosa, would you say that the passion for reading has waned over the years?
If I want to say that the passion for reading has waned over the years, I'm going to attribute that to the fact of technology coming into our classrooms, and the fact that we've moved away from books. We've moved away from teachers having the ability and the freedom to teach in our classrooms like we did before STAR testing came around, before the state testing came around. Teachers had the ability to look as exactly as my colleague says. It says reading is a science, and reading has to start early. But reading also has to start, we also have to know that our kids have an ability or have the option and availability to read at home. And we're not seeing that happening right now, because again, technology has come into the picture a lot. Banned books, being able to read our novels in the classroom, a lot of that is gone. Teachers are very concerned that we're not being able to teach the skills that we need, because the bottom line is this: if you can't read, you can't do anything else in life, So if you can't read, you can't do math. If you can't read, you can't do anything else with that. And so we understand that reading is essential to as to educating our students in the classroom. But when we have a state and a governor that holds us hostage with our funding, which means then that we are not getting the resources that we need to put into our classrooms, to pay our teachers, to give them what they need to teach those reading skills, that makes it very difficult for our teachers to do what they need to do in the classroom. So, has reading waned over the period of time? I'm going to say it probably has. I'm still one of these that I still like to hold a newspaper in my hand. Okay, I do not like to get on the computer and read the newspaper from there. But also when we have principals telling teachers, because STAR is the focus of what teachers do in our classroom day in and day out every single year. When we have principals telling teachers, don't take your kids to the library because we need to have them do practice STAR tests, that says a lot.
When we return, we'll have details about the program to improve literacy in the Canutillo School District and what our panel says parents can do to help encourage their children to read. Stay with us. You're watching ABC 7 Extra Sunday.